There is a really popular book that I think everybody really needs to read. I am not one to read self-help books, but this is one that everybody can't miss out on. I really found a lot of the information in it very shocking, surprising, and really made me start to think about parenting and homeschooling and all of the above. If you are interested to hear more about that and what book I'm talking about, stick around. So the book I'm talking about is Bad Therapy: Why Kids Aren't Growing Up by Abigail Shrier. I heard about this book through several different podcasts, and it really drew me into really being a curiosity about it. A lot of the things in it I already believed, but there was a lot of things in it that really revealed influences that have influenced how we currently parent today in comparison to parents of previous generations. And this is not a book review. I just really want to encourage people to pick it up and read it. And I'm not going to go over all the details of the book because I really think you really need to read the words for yourself. But I wanted to highlight a few things that I felt is very relevant for the homeschooling community. Because we often feel that homeschooling is a solution to a lot of our problems with children of today. But I have noticed that a lot of the things that she mentions here in this book are plaguing the homeschooling community as well. And so that's the things that I wanted to talk about today. But I really think this book needs to be, you can take my words and my ideas that I've gotten from the book in this video that you might find helpful, but reading this book yourself is this is one that I think everybody needs to have on their shelf, whether you love to read or not, or whether, you really don't like listening to other people's opinions and self-help books. That's not really what this is. And I think it's a really important read for everyone because it's very eye-opening. So this book primarily focuses on the issues that the latest two generations have been facing, Gen Z, which are the teens of today, and then Gen Alpha, which are our younger children currently right now, the elementary age up to maybe middle school are the Gen Alpha, and then above that are Gen Zs. And the issues with our children of today is that there are more and more and more mental health crises going on, a lot of anxiety and depression. The children of today are not developing skills and being able to thrive. I've recently had conversations with a lot of moms today who have told me that their adult children are still at home, don't want to work, don't really know what career path they want to go on, don't want to go to secondary education, and they just want to live off their parents and think about what it is they'd like to do. A lot of them have a fear and anxiety of even going out and getting their driver's license. You probably have also heard of kids who are of the age to get a driver's license who are putting it off, who don't necessarily want to rush out the minute they turn 16 to get their license the way that I did and kids that I grew up with did when we were growing up. And you're finding kids that are just not as functional adults as were when we were growing up. When kids were when I went to school and I grew up in the East Coast, things were a little bit different there compared to other provinces in Canada, and probably the same in the United States. But when I graduated from high school, kids were actually getting married out of graduating from high school. Well, that would be absolutely pretty much unheard of these days. I think it does still happen, but on average, children aren't, and I don't think that you should necessarily do that. So don't get me wrong and say kids are ready to be grown up at the age of 18, but they aren't ready to become independent. They're not wanting to learn to do things for themselves. They're satisfied with just still being taken care of by their parents and not thriving. So there's the issue of mental health crises and not becoming effective independent adults when they are reaching that age of independence. And then there's also a growing crisis, and I know you are all aware of it, and several homeschooling channels I watch talk about this. It's a common occurrence where there seems to be an awful lot of kids these days that are being diagnosed with different types of neurodivergent differences. They are developing learning differences, or you could say learning disabilities, like dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD, and so forth. That just seems to be very common, and it seems to be more of a norm. Now, I'm not saying that there are children with learning differences, that there aren't. I'm not saying that there aren't children with learning differences. But this book addresses that as well, where it just seems like everyone you know, it may be every other person you know, you and your own family may have been told that you have these learning differences, and it's just very common. So those are the three things I want to address that this book addresses, that is saying that these are all situations that are preventable and can be changed if we realize what the real causes are. And the real causes are not necessarily, and most often are not, genetic, and are more so related to what influences, including parental influences, in our children's lives. So I don't want to go into every single detail, as I said. I want you to read the book for yourself. I have some notes here, so if I'm looking down, bear with me. I just want to make sure that I am stating what the book talks about in a clear and concise way for you. So there's a number of things that we all agree upon that we know aren't good for us, and we'll say, well, this is the cause, or this is the cause, and this is the cause. And I think it's a multifactorial thing that causes all of these issues, but there are some issues that we are not addressing, and it may be that it's human nature to not want to take some responsibility and blame for some of those issues. I know for one, I don't want to do that. But I think when we can look also at ourselves, we're not just blaming other outside factors. So see, these are some of the outside factors the book addresses that says, yes, these contribute to these issues. One is smartphones, the internet, and social media. We all know that. We know that we want our kids to be on less screens. And we all try to do less screens or no screens, or we try to only do educational screens. That's a big thing that many videos are on. I'm not going to go into those details, but we know that is a problem. The government knows that it's a problem. Recently, in the province of Ontario, the schools have now made new laws where all devices are banned from the schools. The children are not allowed to bring them to school. Teachers have found kids are not focused. They're just playing on their devices. The kids don't have any authority to take it away from the kids. It's become a huge problem. And in Ontario, their standardized testing scores have dropped significantly, and they've actually lowered the standards of education now in our province, because the kids aren't meeting the standards and not even quite meeting the standards. So they've now reduced the standard so that the kids are achieving the standards, which is very sad. So we know that's one of the problems. Another problem that's very easy to blame, and I believe that part of it does definitely contribute to that, is food. Processed foods, poisons in the foods, pesticides, all of these things, unhealthy diets. Definitely, and sensitivities to foods. I hear a lot talk about different sensitivities to gluten, to dairy, to dyes, that if you take those foods out, your children will all be normal. Definitely foods contribute to it as well, and we all need to be aware of making healthier food choices. That is a factor, but it's not, again, the primary factor. Another thing that people have attributed it to, I don't hear this as much, is climate change. That our children of today are very sensitive to the fact that the climate change is become a huge problem, and that they're more focused on addressing the problem, and they're living in a culture of fear of what our future might look like. I don't hear of that one quite so much, but there is a group of people that will focus on climate change being this dramatic problem causing all of this fear and anxiety and ineffectual independence. And then and then the last one that people try to blame this next generation on, and it's really more of a recent thing, is COVID-19 and social isolation. That the year or two where children were just isolated from each other has dramatically affected how children are able to interact with each other. They feel isolated, they feel lonely, and they are developing anxiety and depression. Now, it would be one thing if that was such a prolonged event. A year or 2 years of that happening definitely affected our children, absolutely. But those restrictions have been lifted, and children are being able to go out and interact and socialize again. And the children prior to COVID were having interactions and socialization, and those ones that did go to school prior to COVID knew what, learned to socialize. And if anything, they're the ones that are suffering more so than the children who were just completely isolated and had never attended school or public school or anything in that time. So that doesn't contribute it, but for this long-term effect, where if you look in the book, they have charts and graphs and they show this huge dramatic spike after about between 2010 and 2012, this huge dramatic spike of sudden increase of, really an increase all in the 2000s, but a sudden increase in the Gen Z and Gen Alpha generations, where there is these issues of the increased diagnoses of learning differences and increased diagnoses of mental health disorders, and an increase of children not learning how to function independently, and they're not growing into becoming functional adults. It's more difficult. It's taking them a very long time. They're not wanting to do it. We're having to push them to do it. So this book says, yes, all those things are true, but what they have realized, and I find this so very interesting. Well, first of all, it's interesting that we all know that screens are harming our children, but why are we still giving them screens? Why are we not just drawing a line and saying, no more screens, they're harming our children. Okay, let's just keep giving them the screens. Okay, let's give them this amount of time. That we're caving in and giving to them is really a sign that there is a bigger problem going on than the screens. Why are parents and teachers and governments so hesitant to remove screens from our children? Because, for example, in the province of Ontario, the government realized this is a big problem. Let's ban them from the schools. But do you know who fought to not have this ban put in place? The teachers. The teachers fought to not have this ban put in place. They wanted their students, probably, and I've spoken to some public school teachers about this, that they have such huge problems with behavior in the class that they would rather have their students have their devices to just keep them controlled, because there's violence in the classrooms. There's huge behavior problems that are out of control that they can't handle. And the parents also did not want their devices taken away from their children. I watched news episode after news episode of the news media interviewing parents and teachers who did not like this idea of a ban, which I found it so strange. So if we really believe this is a problem that's contributing to these things that are preventing our children from growing up and developing into strong, effective adults, why aren't we willing to take it away? And we're not willing. I also find it difficult. My husband is okay with them having a little bit of it. My preference would be to take it away, period. And so we can't come to this decision to say, let's just remove it from our house. So we have limits. We have time limits. This is your allotted time, and once it's done, that it's finished. And it seems to be somewhat working. But what this book has touched on and discovered through all of their research, from interviewing psychologists to parents to teachers to children, all alike, they compiled all of this. this person who wrote the book is a journalist, an investigative journalist. And so all of the evidence she compiled pointed to a new form of parenting that has also been applied to schools. And there's a number of other things as well. And what this sort of, how this evolved, this new way of seeing children and how children should be raised through the eyes of the government, teachers, and parents, and specialists, professionals, education professionals, and psychological professionals, they all are on this same page. And where this came from was children that were generally raised in the 80s. That was their primary stage, so probably in high school ages in the 80s. They reflected back on feeling that they were not emotionally seen by their parents, that they were ignored by their parents, that they had so much independence and freedom and but where their emotional health was never addressed. They were never asked, how are you feeling? How are you doing? They never felt in touch with their feelings. They bottled things up. The funny thing that she noticed, though, in her research were that generation and older were very resilient. They could succeed in life. They could have a goal and achieve it. They worked hard. They were not lazy. They were not afraid of being independent. They weren't afraid of making big decisions in life, like buying a home or buying a car. That was just what you did. That was what you did as an adult. But following that generation, a change happened. A few changes happened. One, parents started to believe that they were not experts on their own children. Parents started to believe that they needed an expert to tell them how to parent. And the experts all decided that what children really needed was called social emotional development. The school boards developed it, teachers developed it, parents developed it, and it became embedded into our own psyche, where we believed that the most important thing as a parent is to make sure your children are always happy. You wanted to protect them from ever feeling sad, from ever feeling scared, from being challenged too much, and that your job was you'd pick them up from school and, how was your day? Was it a good day? And if they had a bad day, if they, oh, how can I prevent that from happening? It developed the helicopter parent. And it developed that your goal in life was to ensure that children were happy. Not that they thrived, not that they were resilient, not that they grew in spite of their challenges and in spite of difficulties and events in their life that would actually push them to become stronger and better people. So when we did all of this type of parenting, we actually made them less dependent and strong and resilient. We took that away from them. We made them into people who were not able to think for themselves, because suddenly we all became not expert at being human. We didn't know how to be a human being. We didn't know how to be a child, how to be an adult. We needed to find out, what does the expert say? Oh, I need to make a decision. Who can tell me what the best decision is? We couldn't make decisions for ourselves. We were too afraid. And that is how we are today. If you really reflect on it, I mean, there may be the odd person who isn't that way. You might call those people old school. But today, when I talk to moms, I'm part of a few different co-ops, and there's younger moms than me, and they really want their children to be protected from, scary things, bad language, things that they shouldn't, they want to keep them in a little bubble. They will even admittedly, I've talked to several moms in our homeschooling communities that admit to being a helicopter mom. Oh, excuse me, I gotta go follow my child around in the park playground because I want to make sure that they're safe. I'm a helicopter mom. And I understand not wanting. Of course, no one wants their child to get hurt emotionally, physically, and all of those things. But what we found is children who did get hurt, children who did end up having a few accidents, bad things happening, the consequences led them to become wiser, stronger, and more resilient. So in addition to that happening, our schools and everywhere, school systems, daycares, parenting, is that you need to monitor your child. You should never be left alone. You got to monitor what they're reading. You got to monitor what they're watching. You got to monitor them wherever they go. Don't let them walk around the block by themselves. That's, there could be bad people out there to kidnap them. And I have felt that way. But when we allow them to make decisions for themselves, they actually grow to become more resilient. The other two things that she focuses on this book, and this was eye-opening to me as well. So for this generation of children, parents really feel this way. I've actually watched some funny memes and some funny shorts on YouTube and things where parents are like, my generation of parenting versus my mom's, and this is how you now have to talk to a child now, and we want to always know, where are they at emotionally? How are you feeling? What are your feelings about this? Are you happy or you're sad? What can we do to correct this? Those things go hand in hand with what I just talked about. But when we are always focusing on emotion, two things happen. One is we are making our child think that their emotion, how they are feeling, is the most important thing at all times. So if they are having a bad day, that is the focus, and we need to make sure I'm having a good day. Good day is the most important thing in life. And focus, it's a lot of self-reflection and a lot of self-focus and a lot of not thinking that sometimes we're going to face challenges in our lives, and some people more than others, and some people their whole life might be challenging. And if they are self-deprecating and like, oh, I gotta think about my emotions, you might be going through financial difficulty, and none of that's going to be good for a very long time. And if you're only just focused on your emotions and your feelings all the time, you're not looking at how to look outside of those emotions and how to deal with the events and the things that you have to face to overcome in your life. You're not preparing yourself to just be like, okay, suck up that emotion and face what's happening head on and just deal with it. We're learning not to function because we're so focused on our feelings. And if you're a Christian or not a Christian, either way, I think this is something that's very truthful. Our feelings don't tell us the truth. The Bible tells us that our heart is deceitful. Our feelings are deceitful. They're not telling us the truth of what's really happening around us. And so we really need to not lead with our heart on our sleeve. We really can't lead with our feelings. We need to teach our children to, sometimes we're going to have bad feelings, and like they were tough in the 60s and 70s, suck it up, move on. That is almost the way we really want to address it. Now, the kids of the 80s that had the hurt feelings always told to suck it up, even though they might have had hurt feelings by always being told to suck it up, they became resilient. They were more resilient than our children of today. And I think there's probably a happy medium. I don't think we have to be hard and like just, I think it's okay to comfort our children, but to focus on the fact that your feelings, you gotta know how you're feeling at all times. How did that movie make you feel? How did that book make you feel? How did that kid make you feel when they talk to you? Like, when you're doing that, you're telling your child your feelings are the most important thing, period. And that's not right. It's not right. We can't function as adults when we're always just focusing on ourselves and our own feelings. Secondly, is when we're constantly asking how they're feeling. There was a study that showed that veterans who were in therapy for PTSD, it was a high number, but let's just say 40–50% of them never got better through the therapy. Why? Because in therapy, they just had to keep on reflecting and thinking about all the bad events that they had faced, which caused the PTSD. So they were constantly in a state of PTSD. We need to look past those bad things. We need to look to a better future as opposed to let's keep reflecting on those bad feelings. Let's keep talking about the bad feeling. I know that when something bad happens and I'm talking about it with my kids, I realize, well, if we just keep talking about this bad thing over and over, we're never going to feel good about it. We need to get past it. We need to say, okay, that bad thing happened. That wasn't good. Let's put that away. Let's put that to rest and move forward. So therapy, I really think she has a point, and she spoke to many psychologists and therapists where they said that therapy is not good for everyone. It's helpful for certain things to get over a particular acute problem. But chronic therapy, where it's constantly done, just people who are like, I got to go talk to my coach or my therapist, and they do it for all their whole life, it's actually making them very dependent and needing to talk about all their feelings and talk everything out and not being able to take control of their own life. Therapy, a lot of these psychologists and therapists have agreed, and I've actually seen some arguments on social media where these psychologists are very against this book. They're like, this book is horrible because they're saying that therapy is bad. Well, sometimes therapy is not good. And I think that she has some excellent points in there about that. Not everyone needs therapy, and if you do need therapy, it should be to treat that particular event, that particular problem, and then move on. When you're doing therapy for the rest of your life because you're constantly focusing on those feelings, you're never going to get out of that hole because you're always focusing on that bad and talking about that bad day in and day out and day in and day out and not moving on from that place. You're stuck. One thing that I have found in our homeschooling community, I used to go on to Facebook homeschooling groups and read questions and enjoy the conversation and enjoy the discussion. But I have found recently, not even recently, probably the past couple of years, since COVID particularly, when homeschooling really boomed, because that's when COVID really boomed, everyone was starting to homeschool. And everyone wanted to put in their 2 cents about homeschooling, which is fine. But the 2 cents that I feel became too much for me, and they talk about this in this book, is that everyone's solution to a problem in homeschool, whether it be that the student is irritable one day, or one day the student complains that they don't want to do any more schoolwork, or whether one day they struggle with a certain math topic, or when one day a mom says that the child's handwriting is pretty messy and they've been working on it for a year. No matter the topic, maybe it's that the siblings had an argument one day. Everybody, there's like sometimes hundreds, it seems like, of comments. Did you ever get them diagnosed? Did you ever get them? That sounds to me like it's ADHD. That sounds like dysgraphia, dyslexia, ADHD. I think it's in the foods. If you take out this foods, they won't have. We have all become mini psychologists. We all feel we are able to diagnose our children, and we're all diagnosing all the children around us. We're hearing about these stories and we're automatically saying that they have ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia. And I don't know if you've ever looked into it a lot, but when you look at the criteria for, say, ADHD, we are all have some of them meet those criteria from time to time. Having a little bit of anxiety is human nature, and some of the things that can happen, whether you're thinking too much or you're not, there's a lot of things where at times, from time to time, a lot of kids and adults can meet those criteria, and it doesn't mean that you automatically need a diagnosis. Now, there are some who do require a diagnosis and do require some additional help and support. But have you not also just wondered whether we all just learn differently? Who's to say that this one way is the way that everyone is the standard? This is the way we're intended to learn, and anything else is some kind of, now we don't want to call it disability, we call it a difference. And we say neurodivergence because they're divergent, which I appreciate that because I think that's a bit more positive. It's saying that they have a different learning style, but instead of giving, what happens sometimes is when we give a child a diagnosis, no matter if we call it a difference or a disability or being neurodivergent or even gifted, but they feel different. They feel different and they see themselves as different. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes it can affect them far more greatly than just trying to help them out in different ways without labeling them and giving them a diagnosis. I feel like diagnoses are handed out like candy at Halloween these days. And I don't believe that everyone around me that I know that have these diagnoses truly are real. They might be different because we are all different. We have different preferences. One child might be musical, one child might be athletic, one child, we're all different. We're all created differently. And that does not mean we have a diagnosis. And I just have a problem with that. But the other really, and this will be my last point, the other really interesting thing that she says in here, she believes that parents are often very eager to have their child diagnosed because it tells them that the reason why their child is having some kind of difficulty is because all along they were genetically predisposed to this diagnosis. And it wasn't me. I wasn't a bad parent. I didn't do something wrong that caused my child to have anxiety or caused my child to be afraid to cross the street without a parent holding their hand, or did not want to, we want to blame their differences on a diagnosis and not take some of the blame or realize that maybe our parenting or maybe our own anxieties or emotions, being unable to manage our own emotions, has been imprinted on our children. So I think this book is it's an excellent book. It just makes you self-reflect on your own family, your family's style, your homeschool style. We often believe that homeschooling is a way that shelters us from all of those problems and it's the solution to everything. But there are issues that can be caused because of our own way of thinking and our own parenting styles. And I've made some changes in that I did often feel that I needed to ask my kids, did you have a fun time? Was it great? No, it was boring. And I don't want to reflect on those things anymore. It's not always about what was fun for you, what made you happy. One thing she pointed out in here is that we are actually not often truly happy. Most of the time we're neutral, or we're angry, or we're sad, or we're disappointed, but happiness is not the always constant feeling that we're feeling all the time. In fact, when we do recognize we're feeling happy, we hold on to that moment, but happiness is not just the standard way we should always be at every second. Can we be calm and peaceful? Yes, but happiness, delirious happiness is not something that we experience all the time, and it should not be our goal, because if our goal is to constantly achieve happiness, we're not going to be living very wisely, responsibly, all of these, chasing our dreams to constantly make us feel happy. And that happiness, I believe having joy is different from happiness. And joy doesn't mean we have to be feeling elated at all times. I hope you check out this book. I hope you found this helpful. I hope this wasn't too controversial of a video. I don't mean to say these things to step on toes. I think there's a lot of rethinking, from generation to generation to the end of time. I'm sure every generation of parenting will have done something wrong. But if we can help to correct some of the changes and mistakes that we're making currently, if we can do that now for our children, I think it's really important to do that. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.